Good evening, and welcome to Technology Trends, a program about ancient wisdom and new and future technologies. I'm your host, Steve Nobge, and our guest this evening is Lance Carlisle Carter, an epigrapher, which means he studies ancient inscriptions and interprets them. Oh, welcome back.
Well, thanks, Steve. It's good to be here again.
So you have some, I'll say an individual interpretation on Phaistos Disc and other ancient writings that have appeared in the past.
Right. So I put together an animation, an astronomical animation about archaeoastronomy, really, ancient inscriptions. And we've talked about this a little before, but the animations themselves are sort of new for me to create, and so they're a different look at a type of writing system. But some linguists wouldn't call it a writing system because they can't connect signs to sounds or meanings, or because it's so in the past and forgotten, they figure it can't be decoded, so why try in a lot of cases? There's just not enough information, not enough clay tablets, not enough inscriptions, not enough bones inscribed and all that. So the argument tonight is that these ancient inscriptions are somehow connected with the sky and with constellations of the past. And ancient writing, therefore, isn't necessarily connected with language or words. It's connected with a device of calculating the movements of the heavens, basically, through the year, through the night. And that's what we want to see here and talk about, is how this can be perceived. And so
these ancient writings could actually be pictorial constructions of the ancient civilization. It would be their constellations.
Right, that's the key, is that we can't impose our ideas upon these ancient peoples and say, this is the way they thought, this is the way they saw life, this is the way they calculated things, this is the way they related scripts or inscriptions or signs to words or ideas or, all kinds of meaningful things. But what we're going to look at tonight is a lot of what might be called pictograms, or sort of hieroglyphic stuff, like the Dendera zodiac, which I think is a planisphere, and the Phaistos Disc, which I see as a planisphere, a two-sided one, and probably built for two different times. So the idea of that language is somehow connected to these ancient objects is a secondary consideration that many modern, scholars have come to that conclusion, that writing is a separate discipline, and it was used separately than the oral tradition and oral wisdom. And so, that's what I could say.
Okay. So we have the Phaistos Disc coming up. This was discovered in Crete, 1908, I guess.
Yeah, so I think the whole idea that we don't know much about these ancient Crete inscriptions, like the Phaistos Disc, and what is that axe called? The
yes.
Archeolary axe. And the linear A and linear B. Linear B deciphered by Michael Ventris, and others contributed, but he came up with the the correspondence to ancient Greek. So, but we should probably be going pretty quick.
Mm-hmm. So you're going to give us the example of the Phaistos Disc and overlay it with some constellations.
Right. So why don't we start rolling? And there we are.
So this was actually discovered in a Minoan palace in Phaistos, Crete. And originally it was... So this is a two-sided clay disc.
Right. So the thing about the disc is we don't really know where it was originally made because the clay hasn't been really determined, but probably somewhere in Greece and probably Crete, but we still don't know. And so there's a picture of side A, and here's another picture of side A with the spiral you can see at the middle. Now, if we were to take and look at the night sky of 2000 BC, it would be very similar to the sky of today, but somewhat different. And the idea of putting the Phaistos disc itself right over the star configuration is one that gives a perspective that when converted to the symbols themselves or the signs, or what some call tokens, it is easier to see the correspondence between brighter stars and star groups as constellations or asterisms of ancient peoples. So if we were to take this picture that we see here and be able to see the modern constellations as we do, this is something that gives a perspective that modern thinking can surely relate to, because it is outlined in the perspective that we can apply coordinates and particular perspectives of a right ascension and declination. And as the boundaries and the constellations become clear, we see that the kinds of uses of these symbols, these signs, these tokens, as areas in the sky had meaning, but the meaning, therefore, is as they are read in a spiral pattern from the outside to the in, it said. But if we look at it, we can see that major star groups are represented in particular manners that give rise to a particular configuration that easily makes it possible to draw meridian lines as shown, and be able to put in horizons and be able to see this in various colors as shown now at different opacities. And that gives a perspective in a sort of a different way of thinking, don't you think, Steve?
Yeah, definitely. It's the assumption is when you see this disc, which is about 6 inches in diameter, is they automatically assume it's alphabetic or a language, and it may actually be pictorial.
Right, and so there's a key there. And what do we call writing? But we see if we put these symbols directly in the sky and see them rotated, the Phaistos disc symbols take a new meaning. They take a meaning of common astronomy practiced 2000 BC or 4,000 years ago or earlier. And we can see by just the outlines here that the perspective that those ancient astronomers got from the Phaistos palace complex in Crete was able to give them a clear perspective of the sky at that time. And because of that, they were able to attach token values or names or particular ideas to these places in the sky. And as we see, the meridian lines are again shown, and it shows divisions in the sky in time, and that we can relate to divisions of time as we go through the night. So essentially, by aligning the date and the hour in this motion, you can find the time of year that a particular configuration would be at night, when you could see them, though, of course. So next is we're going to go on to the side B. Side B is the well, I think it's interesting in a way. If you look at the center, it's got sort of a rectangular shape or something with a point in the center. But as we take a look at the signs on the stars of 2000 BC, and then we bring the disc side B into full opacity, and then give them the signs as a certain color reference. And then with that, we can be able to try to see where the reference is in relation to constellations that we normally observe today.
So it's your contention that the Phaistos Disc is actually an ancient planisphere for the northern hemisphere, of course.
Mm-hmm.
This is interesting. Anyone else that you know of studying this, or this is absolutely an original idea?
Well, you know, I was looking in literature about this kind of stuff, and the definition of writing is limited to certain types of things. So astronomy really hasn't been brought into the entire concept of writing proper. So linguists basically dominate the field and are basically setting the rules of what you call writing and a writing system, and it has to have meaning that you attach to linguistic units, you know, syllables and you know, sounds, consonants, nouns, and all that kind of stuff. So the difference that we're showing here is that these icons, these objects that we see as tokens on the Phaistos disc, are actually objects. They're in the sky. Mm-hmm. We call them we call constellations objects. Why can't we call these pictures in the sky objects? Well, they are objects, and if you treat them as objects, they're icons. And once you treat an object that you know is there, is going to be there every night, you know, that as an icon, that as an object, and that as an idea, that as a sound that can be transferred to any language that people are using the signs. So in trying to decipher undeciphered scripts, one has to look at what language is being used, but what if they're using a universal language that doesn't depend on language itself? It depends on astronomy, which is science. And so if you exclude science from language, then you're saying, well, we're only including like numbers. You know, the Sumerians had numbers, and before that they had tokens, which were clay, you know, discs that had inscriptions of numbers and other objects and signs that were used in commerce and other types of things like that. So as we look at this rotation, we can see that the Phaistos disc could be held up in a location of Phaistos, and that you could be able to see these things in the sky, be able to find your deity, be able to say or, you know, think what they are, say words if you wanted to, read prayers into the sequence, read it, you know, in particular directions that you liked, you know, from the, you know, outward to the center, or even the center to the outward. But let's go on to the Despilio tablet, which is a really remarkable find from 5,260 BC plus or minus 40, and this is as you can see, little grooves on these tablets. These are letters from that were scratched in. These predate Sumerian writing by a couple thousand years at least. And so here is the night sky of 2000 BC, but this Despilio tablet, even though it's, a few thousand years before, it's the stellar configuration still remains the same pretty much, because there isn't that much movement on this level in that amount of time.
So this is actually a wooden tablet that's been carbon dated, radiocarbon dated. So they know with accuracy how
radiocarbon accuracy within 40 years, or what is it, 40 or 80 years, what is it, plus or minus 40. So the idea that the inscriptions on this tablet predate any inscriptions or any writing. And so do you call this writing? No, they say this is, a pseudo-script. We don't know what to call it. We can't decipher it. It's undecipherable. There's not enough examples. We don't know where it's coming from. And the idea that it is something that it is so, perceptible as an astronomical instrument that is portable. And so this is like portable rock art, but it's portable, tablet of wooden art. And this is a portable astronomical device, such as a planisphere. So you could use this Despilio tablet things and find various types of orientations. And so if we look at this in a particular manner, we can see that if it were in space, you could be able to identify the positions as having meaning to that goes beyond a meaning that's associated with like your culture, because your astronomers are portable too. They can run around, and for some reason I think astronomy was shared between all these ancient cultures, and it's something that they just took with them wherever they went, and it was part of their high elite kind of thing they did as part of their prayers. Many of these inscriptions are prayers to ancients or kings or deities or gods or whomever they, and so we're looking at things that are meant to be celestial, but they're not necessarily meant to be read as they're written. And so you could read it in different languages and still come up with your words for it if you liked. And so what we're talking about in undeciphered scripts is that the ability of the ancient mind to be able to read inscriptions or sounds or things like, not the sounds or transfer what a particular sign meant to a sound in their culture or their group or their tribal unit. And considering that these are areas of worship sometimes I figure that it figures to me that certain clans worship certain areas in the sky. And so, and then they could be able to say, well, my group of stars is on the ascendant or something, like, well, but mine is on midheaven, so, but mine's rising to the meridian. But let's look at this. This inscription of the Despilio tablet and the Phaistos Disc side B, the X marks the spot, and these two signs correspond in this area of the sky. Now, if we look at this as a correspondence between the two systems, we see that the Phaistos Disc, even though it is at least 2,000 260 years later, it is following a pattern that you see the cross of the Dispiliad shield there?
Yes.
Okay, so now what we're going to look for is another cross that's going to come in on the Phaistos Disc side B. So see that there?
Mm-hmm.
So what I'm saying is that these two images that we can identify through their numbers in parts of Hercules have significance in correlating the origin or the shared correspondences between these two cultures, whatever that may be, throughout the the millennia that separated them.
So they use the same symbol, so probably the cultures were related.
Yeah, but you wonder, couldn't say for sure, but maybe they borrowed it, or maybe it was handed down.
Or maybe it was traded.
Yeah, and, but consider that the Phaistos Disc was a real advancement from that older system. You could see how there was development going on for thousands of years. And so are we going to say that, oh, well, for thousands of years it was proto-writing and pre-writing, and whatever they did wasn't considered writing, so we can ignore it because we can't pronounce it?
Because there's no existing language.
Right, so let's go on to this archaeoastronomy.
A double-bladed axe from Crete.
Isn't that interesting? Look at that.
That's the archaeoastronomy axe. And double-bladed axes only appear in Crete.
Right, isn't that interesting? I mean, that they appear later in, movies and TV shows is, mythical. This is real. So what I'm showing here is the actual inscriptions in the sky, shown with the colors, and cyan seems to work well with the showing contrast between all these various colors. But what I want to show here is the various placement of this alignment of the inscription, and what that meant to the bearer of the inscription, as they were able to take the inscription and hold it in a particular manner, be able to identify the signs of the inscription, and be able to see what they meant because of the particular orientation of the heavens at that time of year and that time of night.
The other interesting significance of this axe is, it wasn't dropped there by a trader. It's a double-bladed axe from the known period, and this is the only civilization that had double-bladed axes. Therefore, that its origin was on Crete.
Right.
There's absolutely no doubt about it.
So what are we going to say, that linear B is the only form of writing that we know that existed on Crete, because we know it connects to the Greek language. Linear A and Cretan hieroglyphics, and I think there's another Cretan form, that those are not actually writing because they are undeciphered and they don't have a corpus of tablets to find a language. So they will be, remain undeciphered unless they are considered astronomical, and then
you may find a Rosetta Stone somewhere.
I mean, but the difference is that what they found is like, very small, like iconic engravings, inscriptions that are just so small that it doesn't look like they evolved to the point of using those signs as a particular a meaningful language related things, but they were astronomical units that could be used as good luck tokens, or charms or such, and you could have your own asterism or constellation, wear it around your neck or something, and so to me it seemed like, oh yeah, everybody knew what each one of those were and where it was and what it was for and what its orientation was. And you could see its orientation on the axis. You look at the meridian lines as you go through, and then you could tell exactly, or guesstimate really what it was that was, from the night before at least, or from the year before, or from the season before. So it's a means of teaching and learning and passing on a tradition that is actually, it is linear because it's up and down, and it is, but let's go on to linear A deciphered. Now, is that in a line? What do you think? Those letters, they don't look like they're lined up. But let's look at the northern sky of 2000 BC and see how these inscriptions line up with the sky. So the sky itself is showing that these inscriptions really fall over some of the major or higher magnitude stars in those areas, and that the voids are really voids of bright stars in that area, but you can see by the configuration that the pattern lends itself to a particular projection that is seen that is circular but is also a spiral, and through that spiral you can be able to determine a type of relationship to spatial coordinates if you're adding right ascension and declination, and you can see by division into various constellational groups that these are not much bigger than what we would say a constellation would be, but they're placed in a different way, and they have different boundary types. And so if we look at the size, shape, and the orientation of the letters, that the stance is basically following a circular leaning pattern towards the center. You can see by the meridian lines that the patterns drawn are very exacting to a type of lineup, and that
yeah, linear A is interesting in that it's composed of roughly 7,360 to about 7,400 symbols. So it doesn't appear to be an alphabet. Alphabets don't
well, I didn't know that many.
Yeah.
That's a lot.
There are 1,427 objects so far that have linear A on them.
Well, that'll be fun to look at.
And you'd think after this amount of time they would have put something together with that many specimens.
Well, I mean, they haven't put them up in the sky like you can see.
True.
And so they can't, like I've shown a superimposition of two different time eras that show that the same symbol was and can be used. So what are we deciphering? We're deciphering a language of symbols that use position as indicators, and whatever they called them during different, thousands of years, dialects change, so it might have said something or meant something. But these peoples traveled a lot. They were migratory.
And they traded a lot, so it's...
Yeah, they don't know, but I don't think they traded these double axes out of Crete, but they didn't trade. Well, linear A was found in the various places, but to be able to have a bowl...
That's true. It's been found in Greece, Turkey, and Israel.
Okay, now look at these lines. I lined these lines up to show how these groups are basically like meridian lines. You can tell the time of night by them, or the time of year, as you wish, and be able to use it as a coordinate system for spatial navigation, as you can see, meridian lines, basically the curved parts are horizons, and the straits are meridians, but they're based on a 24-hour time period.
So you could almost tell what month these were made.
Well, it's sort of not that easy, but you can see these are so general, and the time period is thousands of years that these shapes are valid. So it's not like you can make it. You couldn't do it monthly, but you could orient it monthly through a different methodology I'll talk about.
Okay. Now what I was saying is like a planisphere with you can tell by the constellations that are showing in the particular area of the sky, and they change from month to month.
Yeah. Well, let me talk about the tablet now. It's that the linear A tablet also has signs, but they're more in a line. They're on a tablet we saw, and they have a specific type of orientation. The stance is particular vertical. The lines are horizontal. The shapes are based on the configuration of star patterns within the confinements of that border of that particular shape pattern, which is based on a type of sizing that is done by grouping stars in particular areas into particular star groups and patterns, as you can see. So not all stars are included in it, but enough stars are included that includes a type of look at the patterning that gives the voids meaning as well. And because of that, there's many types of interpretations that are particularly valid, but you can see through this, the meridians are not necessarily playing a big part in this role of this tablet, because this inscription is not based on the polar coordinates of the night sky of 2000 BC. It's just a straight out written across the sky, as many inscriptions are. But that's the way they liked to do it in those days, because if you could see your inscription up in the sky, you could see it rotating all night long, can't you? Mm-hmm. And so it's you could be reading it upside down. You could read it. You could be reading it, sideways. So it's a matter that it's rotating with a particular type of. Well, you can consistently see its rotation at night and follow it through the year and see it. And so it's like if it's a prayer, you can know it, you can read it backwards and forwards. Mm-hmm. And so it's something like up in lights, basically, as I'm trying to show it, is that the various opacities are shown in various spectral colors because of the necessity of showing the contrast. And here we see lines not necessarily lining up for this tablet. The tablet doesn't seem to be as polar oriented as the linear A cup. And
so this is actually an example of the physical astronomy. They didn't have TV or radio. They had other things to do to occupy their time.
Yeah, they had to look up. Mm-hmm. But things were looking up back then. I was always looking up. But the contrast of the colors kind of gives you an idea that on cloudy nights you could sort of see them, sort of not. But the king of Ungar, so in modern day Iraq, lower Iraq, here's the ruins, here's a stone gate socket of King Ungar and Second Dynasty. So this Bring Out the Stars again.
King and
he was one of the early kings, and so here's the inscription over the socket we saw, and I'm bringing it out and sort of showing the color there, as seeing it not necessarily as a piece of stone, diorite, but the try to see the pattern there. And there is a pattern if you can see closely the modern constellations. You can see where it's placed directly over the center of the sky, which is the most visible part. I mean, the center is the north, the North Pole, celestial North Pole. So that's going to be well, it's not always the most visible.
Well, it's a reference point.
Yeah, you can always find it because all the other stars rotate around it. And so we see that it's well within the boundaries of the circumpolar, most of the circumpolar constellations that we have today. And the type of configuration, you can see that the voids are used well, and there was an overuse of space in the inscription. The signs are arranged in a particular manner that shows their consistent orientation to spatial coordinates and the ability to see through a type of coordinate system that was had various orientations. And so types of objects or inscriptions like this could be interpreted in ways that were sometimes religious, but sometimes these were more oriented towards the administrative or the kingly kind of inscription that would talk about, the king erecting a gate here and there or something like that. And the idea there was that this inscription, though, was in the sky, and so it was there forever, right? And so once the king said something, the scribes, which were astronomers, got up there and found how you could write it up there. Mm-hmm. It took them years prior. They could, if they were smart, they could draw it in a week or two, I guess. But you could see that it took a special eye to find these kind of patterns, to kind of try to find the meaning, to try to say the words or try to say anything. Now, this was...
You need a really large papyrus to do this. Can you imagine?
Yeah, well, I'm not sure about large papyrus. This was written on a diorite stone, very hard and scratched in, really. So it survived where other everything else is really crushed and thrown away.
Diorite stone is extremely hard.
Yeah, that's why it survived.
And they had to have cut it with a diamond. Because you couldn't, yeah.
I don't know, but here's what the Magliano disc. Mm-hmm. There was a picture of it, and I don't know, here is Recto. So...
Magliano, yes. Oh, this one's lead. Okay, it lasts. And it's fairly soft. Yeah, so you can.
Yeah, I think they said it was cast. The shape was cast. So here's the. Now, This was more like.
This is tiny too. It's only like 8 centimeters.
Really? Yeah. So, but it's a really much more recent. Maybe I don't know the data, but it's could be.
I
over
believe that's
1,700 years later or something.
yeah. It's about 400 to 500 BC. So it's.
Oh, okay, yeah. So that's at least 16. So there is the idea there that is that the disc from Phaistos has a direct connection to the Etruscan symbols is really interesting, that there could be a connection through another 1,500 years. And so this tradition it's a way of writing, and it's just unrecognized and unpopularized and uninvestigated. I mean, I'm only doing graphics. I can't really explain it too well because it takes scholars in various historical areas and linguistics and mathematics and statistics and all that to make sense of it.
Well, it's probably their form of astronomical, not mathematics, but observation. Basically, astronomy starts by making celestial observations over a long period of time. Hopefully, you're not too far north or too far south where it's cloudy. But if you're somewhere around the equator and you have good weather and great viewing, yeah, you could make your own star charts.
Right, it looks like that's what they were doing, and we're just ignoring it as a language. You know, we could say astronomy is a language. It's written like a language, really, but it's not interpreted or used, you know, sounded out that way. But look at musical notation. You know, each of the notes has, you know, corresponds to a letter, but then each of the notes can have be sung in a different way, and you know, so it's not confined to it. But we don't call musical notation a writing system, or do we? We don't call music a language, or do we? And so, do we call mathematics a language? Or do we, you know? And so the thing is that as the scholars draw the lines between their disciplines, they make it harder to come to a common, you know, solution, which is probably simpler than all their ones put together.
Well, if you study something long enough, then you'll get a Nobel Prize.
Well, I mean, deciphering things like this disc here is something that, you know, I think there's a lot of amateurs that could get into this kind of work, because it takes a type of investigation or, you know, curiosity that, you know, not many professionals have. So I would encourage amateurs and, you know, even professionals to look into this more, because there's more that can be found than just the graphics that I'm finding, and the meanings are so deep, and the graphical symbolism goes beyond what can be shown in the pure graphics, and the interpretation and the organization of these types of concepts has to be done in such a manner that is so precise that is beyond the scope of my, you know, little software abilities. And to be able to produce graphics like this can only come from, you know, great photography and illustrations and all that. And so there is not much of that around. So, I mean, the work of others has to be super, and probably some supercomputers in there too to get a whole picture. And it's not just, a few inscriptions we see tonight. There's a whole hundreds of thousands of inscriptions that are this way. That's the written language of the past until the last few thousand years. So it's like we've had a written language called astronomy for hundreds of thousands of years, probably, at least 100,000 years with some findings in Africa and other areas. So the idea that astronomy is so ancient and the way they did astronomy is sort of like so similar. I mean, I have an example of a modern day planisphere that, you can just get it and just turn it just like these same ones, the same pictures that I had the graphics on. And so essentially, the ancients had built this kind of tool that we could go out and, buy cheaply. Mm-hmm. And that's the main concept here, is that the ancients had a way to do this, and they had the technology, they had the pictures, they had the types of names that they wanted to apply.
And they had lots of time.
They had thousands of years, you were saying. I mean, if this is a tradition that has been going on for, we know it's gone on for perhaps, since 2000 BC, 5200 BC. There's probably other inscriptions. We know there's ancient cave paintings. And we've gone through those, but now that we can see it through the as a moving thing, I think it's going to bring a lot more meaning to it, because before we were talking about these shows about the cave art, it was static picture there, but we could have been, if I knew how to do it, I could have shown how to turn it like we're seeing now. This disc is turning. So the idea that you can interpret something just by its shape, the shape of the disc is important.
It would be interesting if eventually you could actually date an archaeological site by archeoastronomy. You would take your cave painting and overlay it and
well, you know what, I think that you're onto something, and we started to talk about this, about some other inscriptions, but I don't want to go too far afield, but you're on the right track with that idea. Now let's go on to Dendera complex, and this is an interesting kind of, they call it the Dendera zodiac, but it's got the 12 pictures of zodiacal figures in the center, and they call there's 38 decans out there, but the problem is that it doesn't really show a night sky. As such, it shows a particular configuration, which I call a planisphere, because it's not showing the zodiac. Now, the zodiacs, which you've seen there, are the 12 signs of the zodiac, were pictured. We can start to see them in a bit of color there. We can't go through them all there, but in the pictures you can see the 12. But if we drop out the actual wood engraved,
there's a French mathematician, Joseph Fourier, and he actually estimated that this was 2,500 years old.
Well, I don't know if that's the case, but it seems, what I want to show is, I don't think so, is because I'm going to show it. It was
published in 1802, so.
Well, I think the modern scholarship shows it to about 52 BC, but what I want to show is that if I tried to apply it to the same star chart as the other star chart of 2000 BC, it's not going to fit exactly because it has a different orientation, and it's going to rotate in an oblong manner, and that's because the orientation in 2,000 years made the pole star change from to another star in Draco, and the orientation that I could find on this Dendera planisphere was closer to a star which wasn't on the exact path of the precession of the pole. And so because it wasn't exactly there, the Egyptians chose a place in the sky which was nearest in order to make the drawing of the planisphere.
And that was the star Theban, wasn't it? Yeah.
No, Theban was the one they used before, thousands of years before that. But I think the planisphere here was made thousands of years later because it's oriented around a different star, I think K of Draco, and it isn't exactly on the, it's the nearest to the pole at that time. And so the orientation of these figures, or these signs, are what we, they might call them, signs of the zodiac. But the problem is that I tried, looking at it in that perspective that the literature tries to use, and the pictures don't fit over the stars, and it's just amazing. All the pictures and all the literature, nobody really actually tried to place the zodiac over the sky in a meaningful manner that was able to give the pictorial or the pictorial reference to the sky and the constellations. So this is my own view. It could be wrong, but it's just a matter of seeing this in a different perspective. It's not a zodiac, I'd say. It's more a planisphere. And the Greeks came along and put the same signs as the Egyptians did into a, into the solar zodiac. And so we have the same signs on the planisphere, the Egyptian planisphere, being transferred to the Greek zodiac. So I think it's just like one copied the other, it looks to me, in this particular representation. So here's our credits.
So the Dendera zodiac was actually ceiling engravings in the Temple of Hathor.
It was, yeah, right, and it was moved to the Louvre in Paris.
I'm just thinking, so it's a temple to a god.
No, goddess.
A goddess.
Yeah, Osiris, I think, was part of the complex, and then Hathor.
So probably if they look for symbols of the goddess, god or goddess, that they might actually find something.
Well, the thing is for a lot of reasons, they already have found a lot of this stuff. They just can't make sense of it because they're interpreting it in a manner that is not consistent with the context. And the context of the inscriptions is such that you have to interpret them astronomically instead of linguistically. And so before you can apply a linguistic, sound or meaning, it has to have its context as an astronomical object first identified, and that is part of the decipherment. And decipherment itself is a manner of, uncovering an ancient writing system. So unfortunately, all the undeciphered stuff is not writing because it's undeciphered, because it won't fit into linguistic patterns of interpretation. And You see what I'm saying?
True. And the language could be something similar like Mayan, where you have symbols for an alphabet, and then you actually have symbols for an object. So it could be a combination of the two, and that makes decipherment much more difficult. So, what are your other plans in Discovery? You're going to keep on looking at ancient cave paintings? And
You know, I'd like to do that. You know what I'd like to do is get some of these little clips out onto the YouTube, so if people want to find out more, they can go to archeoastronomy.com, and I'm going to be posting little ones, so it's just whatever is striking my fancy I'm going to throw up there. I mean, try to get uploaded.
Okay. Well, for more information, you may contact Lance Carlisle Carter at archeoastronomy.com. And if you wish to view more programs of this kind, keep those cards and letters coming. May write to Technology Trends, P.O. Box 487, Mountain View, California, 94042. We have a number of shows on DVD, and you can go back through the files on the website and pick out what you want. Well, thanks very much for being with us.
Well, thank you for having me back.
And this is Steve Naj, signing off for Technology Trends.